This is the Remote Podcast, and I'm your host, Victor Kung. You're listening to episode 8. Hello and welcome to the Remote Podcast, episode 8. This podcast is all about location independence, digital nomadism, and living life on your own terms. Each week, we interview a new guest on the show, and this week, I sat down with Matthew Daiter. He is the distributed systems lead engineer at Nomoko, an artificial reality company based in Zurich, Switzerland. Matt dropped out of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign after his freshman year and became a remote worker. He's been living in Europe for over a year, and I actually met him when I was visiting Amsterdam last April. In this week's episode, we discussed the nitty-gritty details of how to work in Europe as a remote worker. Matt outlines his experiences moving to Europe and how he handled the logistics of it, including visas and other regulations. We also talk about what it's like living in Europe and some of the differences between life in the United States and abroad. I really love this episode because Matt is just a very real guy who says it as it is. This episode also covers a lot of information that you won't find anywhere else. So let's get started. Hey Matt, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm really excited to have you on board.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. Yep, those are all the words I have. So let's get started.
Yeah, so I've been super excited about this podcast interview because every time I talk to you, I just learn so much, and it's also a very, very fun, interesting conversations. So no pressure or anything, but I'm expecting more of the same today.
No pressure or anything, but keep serving it. All right, I'll try. Yeah, sure. Cool.
So to give the audience a bit of a background, so Matt and I actually met in Amsterdam back in April, and he was a student at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, before he decided, screw it, dropped out, and then began a life working and living remotely. And right now, he is an engineer at Nomoko. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, so nomoko.camera?
Yeah, in Zurich, Switzerland. So obviously that's like a ton of stuff, and I intend to get into all of that. So why don't you start us off just in the very beginning?
Well, in the very beginning, in 1995, I think I saw a light from a crevice, and then foreign hands pulled me out. Like, how far back do you want me to go? 95?
As far back as is necessary.
Oh, sir, I don't know if you want to go into Dante's Inferno. So, in my early days, maybe like 0 to 10, I grew up in New Jersey, and then I started to go abroad. And I'm going to use that term lightly now because I think they have different implications in different contexts. When I was 14, I went abroad and lived with a Moroccan family in Rennes, in France, for a couple of weeks. Got to experience it, got to experience the culture. I think my host brother was this 21-year-old super cool Moroccan guy who just happened to live in France. And so he and we traveled around, we hung out a lot. It was overall a pretty positive experience. I think I wanted to go back, and that had always been on the back of my mind, but I had never just had that time to take the leap. No time really felt like the right time. So yeah, I mean, I finished up high school. I wound up going down routinely to a university in Boston every weekend to go do some research my senior year, and then also got like pretty close at that university. Wound up not going to that university. Wound up going to Intel for a couple of months before college to work on a computer vision team with these guys that were from Harvard. Really enjoyed computer vision or performing computer vision research. Got to make some super cool stuff there. Didn't really want to go into the corporate like too early. Didn't want to really, feel like a 40-year-old when I was 18. So went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Did freshman year. I enjoyed freshman year, but I think I always had a hesitation towards the University of Illinois because they had chosen my major for me before I had even come. They're allowed to choose your major, and they put you in a major that they think is appropriate for you. So I remember I got my second choice for my major. You're allowed to have 2 preference choices. And I got my second one. They actually rejected me from computer science. They totally turned me down. And I don't know exactly why. I never talked to them about it, but it was just, I wanted to study computer science in college, and they just kind of looked at my application. They were like, no, I guess not. And I was like, great, I guess for the next 40 years, I guess that's not going to happen. And so I studied electrical engineering instead, which was a blast. I love studying electrical engineering. I want to go back to school to study electrical engineering. And I remember just trying to do electrical engineering and architecture, like building architecture. And so I was running around campus. I was doing architecture on one side of this campus. I was taking some courses over there. I was taking some courses on the electrical engineering side, but there just never really seemed to be that interdisciplinary focus that I had really wanted out of a school. I think I just cared too much about architecture to even remotely graduate in 4 years. And I just remember people telling me that it wasn't going to be possible, even remotely, to do what I had wanted to do with my own education. So after that summer, I tried to go to Apple after my freshman year for an internship. And because I think I just wanted to try out being in a big corporation again, because I don't really feel like I got the full experience with Intel. And Intel was like truly Office Space level. Have you seen Office Space before? Do you?
Oh, no, I thought you meant Office Space as like a generic, like Office Space.
Oh, no, I mean the movie. Oh, my God. It's like, people coming to work in ties, and just there were cubicles. All the cubicles are evenly positioned on the floors. Everybody has a number. I think the best part.
Oh, God.
Yeah, the best part about Intel, if you look up your own name in the directory, it has you and then all of your bosses all the way up to the CEO. Like, it just lets you know there's a ladder. And I remember I was talking to my friend, and my friend had just said, yeah, you know what that translates to, right? And I was like, no. And he just went, you, and then bitch, CEO. So yeah, I think I wanted to go somewhere a little bit like on a similar scale, but a little bit less corpy, if you get my vibe. And so I went to Apple and had a good time there. Really skilled engineers, but I just think that large corporation wasn't really what I had wanted to go towards. And so I think when you hit a certain scale, there's the inevitable distance that you gain from your project, where you don't feel enough emotional connection to your or you generally don't. And this is a very big blanket statement. I'm sure there are hundreds of exceptions to this, but I can't generalize across, quote, all big companies, but at least at the two companies I worked at, Intel was different because I was in research and I was on a really small team. But at Apple, I was on WebKit, and at WebKit, there is an almost standardized process to performing your job. Like, everybody uses Bugzilla, and at that scale, Bugzilla is the only tool, or one of the only tools, to manage bug reporting and code additions and code versioning. And it's a fantastic tool, but you write your bug and then you're assigned your number, and then your manager can also give you the numbers of bugs that you're supposed to solve. You have this list of bugs that you're trying to solve, and then you have your trees of bugs that you need to weave down, and you need to go into your bug and click around. And then anytime you want to add code, you maybe need to add, at times, a kilobyte or 2 kilobytes of code. They wanted really short code additions. So I was making bug reports, and I, by the end of my time there, was filing like an if statement. And that would take me maybe a minute to write that code. After 30 minutes of looking around a 5,000 file, or around 5,000 file project, maybe a minute to write that if statement. And then it'd take me 10 minutes to make a bug, and then 15 minutes to write the paragraph, the summary of all the files that I had changed, right? Like, document everything. The majority of your time is actually documentation. It's not really hacking it out and engineering.
Okay, so it's very much more structured, regimented, and systematic approach.
Oh, absolutely.
And for the people who don't know, just give a high level of WebKit. I think I know what it is, but I don't want to embarrass myself.
Yeah, sure. WebKit is the backend to Safari. So Safari is effectively, I'm not going to say the front end to WebKit. Safari is sort of the GUI or the graphic user interface that you use to interact with WebKit, which is the part that renders the web page, runs the JavaScript, runs all of the querying, so on and so forth. So for all the JavaScript developers out there, I was making like the JavaScript compiler or the web page renderer or the new functionality. Like my project was, ever heard of WebRTC?
No.
Okay, so it opens up your webcam from a web page and can send it across browsers. So like that was my thing. And it was a cool project, don't get me wrong. And there's a lot of room to bounce around, but it just didn't seem like I had any emotional connection to my project, simply burdened down by the tools at that scale, which are totally necessary and totally fine. But for them to use, I mean, it's their company. I was just there for a couple of months, but I just didn't really feel that emotional connection. And so I left there and I was really hesitant to go back to UIUC. A couple of months ago, or a couple of months before that, I got accepted, and then I turned down Minerva. And Minerva's the school. It's in San Francisco, 7 different countries in 4 years. It's like what we're going to talk about, but for your college experience. All classes are online, 19 people, maximum size per class. I'm not going to make this into a Minerva ad. Minerva, yeah, I'm not going to do sponsored content, but Minerva seemed like a solid program. It just wasn't really aligned with what I had wanted to do. I had known that I had wanted to be an engineer. Minerva also seemed oddly corporate, but that's a talk for another time. And so I was kind of irritated at myself for turning them down because that was sort of my ticket out of UIUC. But at the same time, I also knew that ticket would lead down a path that I didn't really want to go down. And then at UIUC, the Department of Electrical Engineering was just telling me I couldn't take certain courses, and I was forced to repeat all of these courses of material that I had known. I think they forced me to repeat Introduction to Programming, and like after 5 years of industry experience and I think 10 years of doing C programming, they forced me to take Introduction to C Programming to graduate with an electrical engineering degree. And the department head, when I had talked to him about it, said, quote, I don't care, I don't care. Everybody takes the course, right? Like everybody takes it, you take it too. I'm summarizing, stop complaining and get out. And I had some major reservations about that being my education. So I think that's my long-winded answer to telling you about when I decided to quit school. That, and I'd also been working for this other company for a little bit of time before going back to school, so I needed to enter into school 4 weeks late, and so just catching up with all that work was a big pain in the ass. And then some stuff happened 9 weeks in that had made me effectively drop most of my stuff, and so technically, I really only had 5 weeks of total concentration during that term when I was at school, and then the other 11 weeks were taken up by other processes. And so at the end, I just said, I'm going to call it. I'm dropping out, and I want to finally pursue my dream of going abroad and going to Amsterdam. That's when I met up with my super talented friend, Matt Husko, who you might also want to have on the show. He's really a special guy, went to Exeter with me, and is now incredibly successful and abroad at the Isle of Wight in the UK. He too made that transition, but he's working remotely for a place in New York. He's working at it's effectively a music listening app. I'll let him explain it, but he contacted me and he had said, oh, I heard you want to go abroad. I was thinking of moving to Amsterdam. And I had said, oh, I'd love to move to Amsterdam. I've always wanted to go back to the EU. This is in the middle of fall semester 2015. I'd love to go back to the EU. And so, yeah, I had started searching for jobs.
How was that process like, having to look for a remote job as opposed to an in-office job?
Sure. To be honest, it was actually pretty easy. I think because and it was easier for me because I knew exactly what I wanted. After having worked at large corporations and knowing I wanted to go to a really small team to learn how to make my own thing, I went to AngelList, literally just put in Amsterdam as the location, looked at all the startups, looked at the co-founders, found the co-founders' emails, cold call, or cold email.
And AngelList is a database of startups.
Yes. And so I had yeah, just done that. And then a couple of companies responded. I also didn't know this at the time. The Netherlands is incredibly friendly as a country to having American workers come in for long periods of time with visas. If you're thinking about going to the Netherlands in specific, look up the DAFT. It's the Dutch American Friends Treaty.
It actually says friends in the treaty.
I think it's Dutch American Friends Treaty, or like friendly treaty, but it'll expedite the process of actually coming over and working long term there very quickly. I showed up without a visa on January 11th, and I think within a month I had a 6-month long visa to stay.
They let you in the country even without a visa?
Oh yeah.
Oh wait, oh yeah, of course. Like in the Stegen area, if you have a US passport, you can go in there for 60 days. Is that right? 90 days, yeah.
Yeah, I looked at that, and yeah, I mean, that was a pretty easy process. Also, for the people listening out there, if you were thinking of going to a larger company, after I quit my job at the smaller company I'd gone to for various reasons, things were lied about in the job description, or not really lied about, but things were misconstrued in the job description. It wasn't, just say, there were reasons, and I think we knew it from both ends, that things weren't going to work out. So after that, oh, and my friend also left in April of 2016.
This was the company in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, so this is the company out of Amsterdam.
Actually, when you chose to leave that job, can you talk about what implications that had on the visa, if any? Because I know in the United States, if you're a foreigner working here, your visa is very much tied to your work, and you have to be sponsored by your employee. Is that the same thing in Europe, or is that different?
Yeah, the H-1B. It's kind of similar. The way that I had been hired, I was not actually technically hired. I was running my own. I was, quote, running my own freelance agency, and then they were effectively my 3 clients because they had multiple clients in their startup. So like I had a self-business starting visa, and that effectively got me through a lot of the process pretty quickly because they want Americans coming over to start their own company. And so with that also, that granted a lot of freedoms that I wouldn't have had as an internal worker to the company. I get to choose my own hours. I effectively was looked at as a self-starting freelancer. And yeah, I mean, it helped out a lot with the process.
How did you go about applying? Were you advised by that company in Amsterdam to do so?
The company advised me to do so because they were, quote, a startup that made startups. So they were kind of like a startup studio. And so they helped me out, and they'd walked me through the entire process, and they just said, yeah, so we'll kind of like hire your agency as a freelancing agency, which is totally fine. That's not illegal. For the NSA listening in, that's completely okay.
Can you take us through the steps in applying for your own business? And
yeah, sure.
Just like higher level, I can include it in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I had gone through the KVK, the KVK in Amsterdam. They're kind of the business agency. I needed to tell them my intent for my business, which was freelancing agency, how many employees I had, so on and so forth. That was just for registration. They just wanted to see that I was a standard level business and that I was standard business. I wasn't trying to effectively migrate like a larger business sector into here. I was actually starting my business in the Netherlands. And then I needed to go through my residence permit, a few other permits, and then I had gotten this thing called a BSN, which is a burger service number. It's kind of like I guess the equivalent is sort of like it's not really a social security number, but it's a unique identification for you under the law. And so with that, you can file your taxes, you file everything else that needs to go back to the government. And in the end, it's really just apply for business, go through process for residence permit, get set up with residence permit. And thank God for my employer for walking me through all of those steps. I would not have been able to manage that. But it was just, effectively file for a business and then get a residence permit. And both of those steps are pretty interconnected. They expect people, once they file for a business, to hopefully get a residence permit. And so they'll tell you, even if you ask at the KVK, they'll tell you where to go. And then the IND, which is the taxing system in the Netherlands, just wants to know that you're going to pay your taxes and just wants to see that you're going to be able to support yourself and that you're going to be able to pay for your things, so you're not going to be a financial burden on the state. And so they'll have you come in at, I think they had me come in, I'm not too sure, but they'll start contacting you and they'll ask for your registration documents as to where you live. The big thing in Amsterdam also, where you live is important. Not just because of the minor things like the trash system, the mail delivery system. It lets the IND know how much to tax you per year for just utilities or like public works utilities. And they want to make sure from an institutional standpoint, from a governmental standpoint, people aren't living in the same housing and they aren't trying to scapegoat taxes, or people aren't holding on to public housing, which is incredibly nice, ridiculously cheap housing in places like Amsterdam. They aren't holding on to that housing and then subletting it for 5 or 6 times the price.
Wow. Okay. And you did most of this. Did you do this entire process after you got to Amsterdam?
Yeah. So I did this entire thing in like a month.
But did you get your visa after you did the applications, or did you get your visa prior to that?
No, I got my visa after.
Okay. So you had 90 days because you were a U.S. citizen to be in Amsterdam. And then during that 90 days, you went through the application process to set up your own business.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. No, that's fascinating. I didn't know about that before.
Yeah. It was also, don't get me wrong, it was a good experience to have, but with all of the complications that had worked out between my quote employer, which turned out to try to like scapegoat, I'm not going to say anything. With all the complications that turned out between my employer and with me, maybe this wasn't the best process, but it was definitely the best way, or the best process in terms of a long-term relationship with a company. But it was by far the best way to get there quickly and easily. I don't know how filing for a normal work visa is. I just don't understand that process because I haven't been through it yet, at least in the Netherlands. But from what I've heard, it's not too bad. Yeah, it's supposedly a similar method, but people have told me some horror stories about their employer not being able to get them a visa to stay in the Netherlands. I've heard that from a few people. With this though, it's an almost surefire guarantee as long as you can invoice 3 different companies. That it's the mandate for being quote licensed as a freelancer or labeled as a freelancer. If you're invoicing at least 3 different companies, then yeah, you're able to get yourself starter visa, and it's a surefire way to get into the country. Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So this is the process of if you were to want to work at a European-based company. For people who are working remotely for a US-based company, they can just fly into Europe, decide to live somewhere, and just make sure they don't stay past the amount of time that they're allowed to stay.
Yep.
Yeah, and just to give a bit of background on that, a lot of EU countries, they're part of the Schengen area, the Schengen zone. And if you're in a country that's part of that area, the zone, you can stay there for 90 days. And this 90 days applies to the entire zone. Do you know what happens after 90 days? You have to leave for a minimum period of time.
You need to leave for 90 days. It's 90 days within an 180-day period. So after your first day, you get 89 days out of 100, or 89 days for the next 180 days you can actually be in the zone. So you could be there for a month, leave for 3 months, come back in 2 months, and then just stay for another 3 months.
Got it. And is there any way to get like a longer visa if you were to go down that path, or you're going to be...
Yeah, Germany offers pretty easy visas. I think there are work holiday visas you can get, where if you say you're going to work a part-time job, you can get a visa for up to a year, and then they don't really check if you actually stay at that job. So you just leave. Germany has been known to be one of the easier countries to get a visa for. There are also countries that don't really stamp your passport after you leave. I remember I had friends telling me, when they went through Spain, nobody even looked at their passport while leaving. They just didn't look. They just never stamped it as leaving the EU. The people at the actual counter in Spain, and Spain is notorious for this, the people at the counter in Spain just kind of look at your passport, see that it's American and that you're leaving, and they'll just let you through because they don't want to keep you there. It's not like they're trying to punish you by keeping you there.
But if you don't get your passport stamped, how do they know that you left the Stegen zone?
Because you're outside of it. If you try to come back in the next time, then they'll just say, oh, you were here before, and it's been 180 days, so you're allowed to be here again.
Oh, okay. So they don't. Okay, because when I travel in Asia, a lot of times they look for that exit stamp. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's when you go to not the EU.
Do you think things are changing now with regards to how lax they are about foreigners coming in the wake of what's been going on in the Middle East?
Sure. So I can speak from two perspectives. I can speak from the perspective of Amsterdam and the EU because I had lived there. I had seen a lot of Syrian demonstrations. They actually happened close to my street. And so I just talked with one or two people that happened to be from Syria. I don't know if they were refugees or not. I know that people have been having a harder time getting a visa stamp. It's hard to get in. The border states are becoming very, according to the people that worked in my office, the border states are becoming very difficult to get into. So Hungary, which is at the border of the EU, is just having floods of immigrants come over the borders, and a lot of immigrants try to just stay in Hungary, and Hungary is not generally friendly to foreigners. And so, with all of these refugees coming over and just causing a financial burden on the actual state, it becomes even more aggravated and more of a provoking situation for those border countries like Hungary to try to seal out as many foreigners as possible. I don't think that it's changing in particular for Americans or for people of other countries. I think the refugee situation is just contained to having refugees, or just contained to relating to refugees. Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of overlap there. Now in Switzerland it's different because Switzerland technically is not part of the EU. They're only part of Schengen. They're the one country in Central Europe that isn't part of the EU. And so in Switzerland, it's a totally different process. It is very difficult to get a visa for Switzerland in general for anybody outside of Switzerland. And I mean, as a third-party national, you either need to have a Swiss diploma or go to 15 years, or perform your job for 15 years. It's crazy. They do not want foreigners coming into the country unless you're highly skilled and guaranteed to make a profit for them. They're even trying to implement caps on EU immigrants coming into the country that can permanently stay. And that might get them kicked out of the EU because of the situation they have with dealing with the rest of the EU and the rest of the treaty policies. It's what has been described as a guillotine policy. So if they break one contract, they break all contracts. And there's a vote coming up, I want to say in February of 2017 in Switzerland, to decide whether they're going to implement quotas on the amount of EU workers to come into the country. And if they do pass that, then I think they break one of the treaties of the Schengen area, of the EU treaties they have, which break all of the treaties they have. And so they might just leave the EU. It's a big point that a lot of Swiss people are nervous about.
Right. And I mean, the Brexit sets like a precedent for leaving the EU. So it's not like it's not been done anymore at this point. But on that train of thought of Switzerland, tell me, how did you get from Amsterdam to Switzerland? Because I know when I met you, this is when you were kind of mulling over your next steps back in April, I believe.
Yeah. So in April, I left the company I was working for, and oh my God, things ended. Like I knew they were coming to an end. They knew it was coming to an end. It's a long story. Don't want to get into it. So in April, I had left them, and it was weird because the next day, I had an interview in Switzerland with this company, and I had cold emailed this company because I had wanted to get back into computer vision, and I had said, "Hi, my name is Matt. I do this and that and the other thing, and then I can do this, this, and this, and let me sell myself to you." They said, "Okay, just come in for an interview, I guess."
So did you do the same process you did when you were looking for a job in Amsterdam? Just go to AngelList, look up companies that you were interested in? Pretty much.
Yeah, thanks. And then I had been interviewing at a couple of companies. I had emailed Chronocam, and Chronocam was this one company in Paris that is doing some computer vision research, but they had tried to offer me something that was totally unpaid, and like I couldn't sustain myself off of no pay. And I had been contacting another company in the States because I was thinking about coming back. After that 3 months, I was seriously debating coming back to the States permanently, because it is difficult to be an immigrant to another country. I don't use the term expat, immigrant.
Can you go into that? Take a slight tangent and just talk about the challenges of your experience in Amsterdam for the first 3 months?
Oh, sure. Not being able to fill out your own forms when registering for places to live, places to eat, places to sleep. Not places to eat. Holy shit. Places to live, places to work, so on and so forth. All of that, luckily, was in English for me. But the general attitude was that if you didn't speak Dutch, which is a silly language that very few people do speak, right? Like, there's no use for Dutch outside of the Netherlands. And so people generally do speak English. But if you don't speak Dutch, you're treated very differently. If you don't speak the native language, you're treated very differently. Also, making friends in a foreign city, that was... So I kind of learned the trick to doing that, which is to go to certain meetups that you're interested in, talk to people that have similar interests. It's kind of like man flirting or woman flirting, if you will. Yeah, it's like, oh, you're interested in this. I am too. What are you going to do?
Just trying to grasp straws at like commonalities.
Yeah, but I think like I had made I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I just made the decision to hang out mostly with expats for my first month or 2 months when I was there. And I'd go to these meetups and there'd be these expats there. It'd be like, oh, we all speak English because we're all from different nations and English is kind of the lingua franca of the world. Let's just all speak in English. And I was like, oh, this is my language.
A lot of people.
Yeah, like there are people here. They're friendly. They want to do this. So I had gone there and I had started talking to people there, but I hadn't actually been making Dutch friends, and I kind of felt left out of a lot of the culture. So I made a conscious decision to stop going to expat meetings and start going to other meetups that related to my interests, but that were primarily Dutch. And so I got in contact with a lot of Dutch friends. The friends part is one of the hardest parts. It sounds nuanced, but if I had nobody and I was living in Amsterdam by myself, I would be just, oh my God, I would have been so lonely and so lost. Thank God my friend came out there with me. I can't thank Matt Hughes enough. So yeah, I mean, making friends and also filing for papers from the government are two of the larger issues. There are smaller ones too, making sure that you don't overstay. And in terms of Switzerland, I technically got my visa through Luxembourg. And so, because we have an office in the EU through Luxembourg, and so I work in Luxembourg, but I generally just go to the office in Switzerland to work. And so I need to sublet in Switzerland. Like, I need to sublet a place to stay to work for longer periods of time. Switzerland also has funky laws. Let's see. Yeah, so in Switzerland, you technically it's illegal to take a shower after 10 because it makes too much noise. It's illegal to do your wash and dry after 10 if you live in close proximity to others because it makes too much noise. There are just these funky laws that exist only in Switzerland and nowhere else in the world that I know of, or nowhere else in the EU. And the reason for that is because Switzerland generally tends to have a very standardized process of developing sort of popular Congress on issues and then voting on issues and just keeping them in place. And it gets to the point where, and this is how it was described, it gets to the point where people just don't raise the issues again. And so, like, you can't take a shower after 10 because it will make noise. That law was probably put in place because, you know, a majority of people were having noise complaints and noise issues with that. It also indicates that people are living closely together, and generally people live close together. There are just tendencies that tend to bleed through the culture into the legal system, into the work system, and so picking up on all of those nuances really does take time, and that's something that you definitely need to. That's something that I checked out. It'll help you connect with people much more easily if you actually understand where their legal system, transportation system, effectively where their entire infrastructure is coming. You don't need to know the train schedules to maintain the conversation with the person. I don't know why I said transportation system, but you really need to understand the culture, you need to stay there for a long period of time. You need to understand the nuances that are hidden within the actual culture. You need to be able to pick up on those.
Yeah, no, I think you raised some great points. So I want to talk about two things, and I'll save Switzerland for a little bit later because it sounds like there's a whole lot of things just with that country. But in terms of your experience in Amsterdam, do you think that if you had stayed there for a year, you would have been able to really immerse yourself in like more of the local fabric? Because I feel like whenever you go to a new place, there's always a time period of settling in. And it seems like when you hit your third month, you finally got to that point where you had like a base of maybe expat friends and you're trying to move into hang out with more locals. And I think that's also when I met you as well, because some of your roommates, I guess the vast majority of them were all Dutch.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a breaking in period. Whenever you go to a new place, it takes time to make friends. It takes time to make deep friends. One of the best pieces of advice I can give is to not expect too much from the experience. Let the experience deliver for you. I think I went to Amsterdam and I expected too much of the experience. I think I went there and I was expecting to see everybody biking and almost a show of culture, like almost a demonstration. And I'd hang out with these expats and I'd ask them how I could try and find that sort of fanfare. And when I realized that was almost non-existent, I threw out my expectations and I let the experience just come to me to develop my own sense of expectation. And I think when that period started to hit, when I started to open up outside of just expats to living with Dutch people, working with Dutch people, making the conscious effort to really get into the culture, listen to Dutch music.
Yeah, I remember we listened to a few, that hip-hop artist.
Yeah, Kempy. That shit's my jam. And so shout out to Time for showing me that.
I'll include a link to Kempy in the show notes as well.
Totally. And so when you start making that conscious effort, and you had said something like, is there a breaking in period of maybe a year? I think a year is when you start to see all of the nuances flood in. 3 months in is when you start to get the inkling to break out of that circle. I had been talking with when you should make conscious efforts to break out of that circle, if you want that process to be a year. I've talked with people who were living in Amsterdam as well, who were going to school there from Urbana-Champaign, and they had just hung out with Urbana-Champaign people. It was like, for them, it was just, I went to a new country, to a new continent, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did in Champaign, Illinois, which is a totally contrived culture, or a mostly contrived culture. There's not really like the culture that's developed in Champaign, Illinois over the spirit of beer and wine, aged in the fields of corn, right? Like that. There's not really this deep culture that's sprouted up from the fields of Champagne to really ingrain itself in Champagne.
I think that's what happens. That's pretty much the college study abroad experience. You have kids, a lot of American kids maybe go to France, and that was the thing at the University of Chicago where I went. People would go to the Paris trip and they would just hang out in a big group of friends, just go out after class. They just do everything together. There's very much this group mentality, and I think that's certainly restrictive. On that note, do you think that when your friend left Amsterdam, that kind of forced you to take that extra initiative? Or was this something that just organically happened over time?
Well, I didn't know if I was going to be in Amsterdam. After Matt left Amsterdam, I have more in the college experience too, if you want to go into that, because I'm in kind of a unique position. I'd say Minerva is doing steps to counter that. They're really reaching out to leaders in the culture, to locals, to try and make an easier transition to integrate into the local culture. Minerva's awesome. Just go check them out. That's all I can say.
Sponsored ad.
Like sponsored content. Check out Minerva. Let's see, when my friend left, so I don't like to say that I've planned anything. I've stumbled ass backwards. This is like, throughout life, I stumble ass backwards. When my friend left, I stumbled ass backwards. And the next day, my boss, that a week later had decided that I should probably quit, he set me up with housing with this guy named Tyne. And I mean, you met Tyne. Tyne's a cool dude. Yeah, and so I was with Tyne, and I remember I was just talking to him, and I was just walking around the house, and I was talking to everybody else in the house, and I was meeting people like Mark, who's making Wanderbrief, which is an awesome new service that lets people go abroad and work for some time and get integrated into the culture. And I was meeting all these people with these similar interests to me. Even just living in housing in this sort of dormitory-like structure helped me integrate into the local culture so much faster than working with people, effectively making stuff with people did. Because my work was just, make stuff with these two 20-year-olds. And, like that's fine and dandy. I guess you learn the Dutch way of work. But, I mean, you're there from 9 to 5. And then after 5, like, you go home. They didn't really, like, it's not like there was a barrier to talking to people from work. But I don't know if you want work to become life. It's really hard to make friends outside of work. And so once I was forced to do that, and once I was forced to develop these relationships and connections, I had a blast. Like, Tyne was awesome. Retro was awesome. Mark was awesome. These are all people that lived in my house. These aren't just names that I'm saying.
Yeah, it seemed like it. I had a great time when I visited you guys.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. And I think once I was forced outside of my boundaries, I honestly developed into, I made that experience in Amsterdam unique. And it's to the point where I would go back to the place to my friend's place, and I'd put on Dutch music, and I'd kind of see like a lot of the Americans cringing in the room and not really wanting to listen to it, but I'd see all of the Dutch people just vibing, and I was like, oh fuck yeah, like we did it, fam, like we made it. And all these Dutch people were just vibing to Kempi, because there's no analog to Kempi in American music, and all these American kids were just sitting there, and they were just asking questions like, do you even know what this guy is saying? And I don't understand. Like, I want to put on some like pop music from America. And I was like, I don't like, Jesus Christ, you burned so much CO2 coming over that lake to a new continent, and you're not even going to get out of your own social sphere, right? Like you're
not even going to listen to Kempi.
Yeah, exactly. Like it helped me out with breaking out of that sphere. And so now when I'm going back to Amsterdam in a week, 2 weeks, to present at the European Conference for Computer Vision, I know places to go. Like I have my local shops that I go to. I didn't just live in the center. Like I was around and about Amsterdam. So I know all of those places. My 21st birthday is going to be in Amsterdam, and I know the bar I'm going to. It's not in the center of the city. It's in like a weird part of the city. I know the place to get horse steak now in Amsterdam. Yeah, horse steak, by the way, is the shit in Amsterdam. You got to go to the famous place to get it. But yeah, like I know where to get the best bitterballen, at least for my taste. And bitterballen is this Dutch food that you should try if you ever go to Amsterdam. Get it at a bar, right? Like I know these little words. I remember I was eating croissants and bananas every day and blueberries, and I still remember blaubessen as just blueberries. So if I'm ever like hungry, I can just go up to people shouting blaubessen, and they'll kind of just, after a while, I think they'll get it, and they'll just sort of point in the direction of an Albert Heijn, and I can go to Albert Heijn, or I can go to Dirk, which is the cheaper option, and I can just go pick up food.
You're conversant in Dutch now.
Yeah, like I can
blueberry.
Yeah, some guy whips out a BlackBerry, and I'm like, no, iPhone.
No, I'm so happy for you, and I think it's awesome that you've been able to make great friends and memories in Amsterdam. So just keeping an eye out on time. So I want to talk a bit about Switzerland and how you're enjoying it right now, and actually the scope of what you do, because the work you do is awesome. And then at the very end, if we have some time, I just want to hear some weird travel stories. So I'll let you take it away from here.
Sure, yeah. So I don't think I finished my story on how I actually got to Switzerland. I interviewed with these two guys. I liked them. They liked me. I had interviewed with the rest of the team. Everything was in English. I do speak French, but I don't think I would have been confident going in and describing a scientific analysis of my work in French. Thank God everything was in English. Yeah, oh my God. And so I remember I was around this table of people, and there was this massive Hungarian guy at the corner. It was really intimidating too, because it's, nerdy 40-year-old Hungarian-looking guy, nerdy 30-year-old looking French guy, nerdy 40-year-old or 30-year-old looking Swiss guy, Macho Man Randy Savage in the corner, and then like 30-year-old nerdy looking Iranian woman, all just sitting around this table pinging questions off of me about my background. And I had, quote, made the mistake of wearing an MIT sweater to the interview. And so this guy was like, oh, like, did you go there? I could have worn my ETH Zurich. ETH Zurich is the university there. Like, I could have worn my ETH hoodie, yo. And I was like, yeah, I did research there for 3 years. Like, go fuck yourself as well. Thanks for the judgment, I guess. So he was like, oh, how'd you get that job at 15? Like, our best don't get that job at yada, yada, yada. And I was like, I just sent out emails, man. Like, I just did emails, and I sent out a lot of links to my GitHub, and one guy responded. And the CTO was like, oh, I like that initiative. And the like Hungarian guy was just like, yeah, I don't really know if I'm like that seems pretty sketchy. Like, what were you doing there? And I was like, well, I was like an engineer for some time and a researcher, and then I got promoted to being a manager and to effectively managing a team of 3 or 4 people when developing the software. And so I was like their lead software engineer, and yeah, like that was my time. And this Hungarian guy was looking at me with these. So I remember this Hungarian guy just stood up halfway through the interview, scribbled something on a piece of paper, and slipped it to the CTO before storming out of the room. And I later discovered that said, quote, this kid's bullshit on the paper, or on the piece of paper that he slipped to the CTO. Like, I was spewing bullshit. So, I mean, the interview went on. The CTO and the CEO gave me a pat on the back, and then I left. And I thought I hadn't gotten that job. And I think 3 days later, Kevin, who is the CTO at the company, had given me this task, and he just said, okay, here's our pipeline. Go optimize some stuff. Come back to us in a month. And so at that time, I was planning out my little trip to Singapore and New Zealand and just taking a trip. And so I think when I had met you, I was just cranking forward on that at full throttle. Yeah, so I was cranking forward at full throttle on that. And I just wanted to make sure that like everything was working and everything was up to par with what I had wanted to present. And so I was contacting these guys across the internet, and I was like, hey, I see you have this on GitHub. It's all broken. Or like, fix the fire. So I can like use your stuff to help out my stuff to make this super cool presentation to show to Nomoko. And so I was just I was sprinting around on the internet. I was staying in the same place. I was working for like 16 hours a day, just cranking out this thing, and then was like scounding around. Eventually I just made their project for them. I broke a pretty big speed barrier, and so they had let me on, and the entire team was happy that I was there. And so I wound up in Switzerland through that. And I say I wound up in Switzerland. I technically, under the law, wound up in Luxembourg. And for legal purposes, I permanently reside in Luxembourg. That's the statement I'm gonna give. I sublet in Switzerland long term because my work, or the majority of my team, is in Switzerland, in Zurich. And so I just sublet in Switzerland, but I officially live in Luxembourg.
And how is that so far? Are you, with your experiences in Amsterdam, are you finding yourself adjusting to Switzerland a lot quicker?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Amsterdam was kind of funky. If you get outside of the tourist center, which is the center of the city in Amsterdam, a lot of Dutch culture is so a lot of the architecture is different, a lot of the customs are different, a lot of the people speak with kind of a funny accent, so on and so forth. But yeah, in Switzerland, accents actually funnier, but people were incredibly kind, very friendly. They're a bit conservative, but they're outgoing. And I had stumbled ass backwards into living with this awesome 31-year-old Greek woman who was a postdoc at ETH, who had been working at Disney, and then had just come back from 4 months of traveling. And so she was super cool to live with. And, I just got set up in Zurich, and I was living in Zurich, and that was all awesome. So I had been subletting for her for my maximum amount of time of stay there. And then I had left, and I had effectively registered for my visa in Luxembourg, and then went off to Luxembourg, or going off to Luxembourg soon. And so from there, I'm going to be like staying in Luxembourg, and then hopping down a long term to Switzerland, and it's going to be an awesome process, and I still know all my friends there. And what I'm trying to do right now is to learn German progressively better, because I know elementary German, I just don't know like advanced level German. Just, trying to learn German, integrate into the culture, and then hopefully go to school at ETH Zurich, because I have a lot of those requirements banged out. And so want to go to school for undergrad at ETH Zurich, and hopefully get my degree from there and do my thing.
That's awesome. Because I remember in April, like, you still weren't too sure about what the next steps were. And it seems like, 6 months later, you have some kind of idea of what the next year or so is going to be like.
Oh, absolutely. Again, I stumble through life ass backwards. So like I don't really know if ETH Zurich will work out, but what I do know is like I was hired as a master's graduate equivalent. So I'm totally fine for computer science and for where I need to be. Like I'm doing just fine. And I get to work on cool stuff with a really high quality team. My CTO and my CEO are both awesome people, along with my CFO. I don't mean to just leave him out. It's just I don't really talk to him as much.
So who was the stocky Hungarian guy then?
He worked at the company, but he was fired the day I was hired.
Oh, whoa. That's really good. That's good for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not so good for him, but yeah.
Well, it's Switzerland, right? They have like very good they take care of you labor-wise, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, hey, they take care. It's okay. Yeah.
To tie things up, I think, what's the big advice you would give somebody who's looking to transition into remote work and to work abroad?
So first off, research the culture, research everything that you're going into, research. You can never do enough research. Don't let it tie you down. Don't let it prejudice you, but just keep on trying to take in facts. Learn the language as well. And then have a game plan going in. Like, I didn't have a game plan going into Amsterdam. I had the illusion of a game plan, but didn't really have a game plan. And in terms of just life philosophy and going through, bouncing around to different countries, working in different places, start to try to look at your time not as causal, but in terms of frequencies. So frequencies of unique events and how frequent those events start to emerge, what you can do to make these frequencies of events emerge more.
Okay, so live for the experiences, almost like that cliched statement, and to seek out more of the experiences that are worthwhile to you.
Yeah, I guess. What I'm saying is we have a habit of normalizing our experiences very heavily. And I did that a lot in high school. I tried to normalize in high school. I tried to effectively Xanax high school. Not saying that I took Xanax, but like you could replace me. You can even ask Dan Yu about this. You could replace me with an Ambien pill, and it'd probably be the same role that I played. Just a floating Ambien pill in the classroom, and that was probably me. I was a boring kid in high school, and then I took a first step, and I started to push myself outside of these boundaries, and I realized that I wasn't happy at my job, or my internship at Apple, and I had started to force myself outside of these boundaries, and once you realize that time has normalized the frequencies of events that are happening in your life and that things seem to be slowing down, you don't seem to get these frequencies of highs anymore. Highs over, creating and then like amplifying a product and then moving to a new place and then trying to do this other stuff. Once you feel your stuff starting to slow down and the wave starts to normalize, it's almost a kick to try to shift it up. I'm just thinking in terms of waves here, because again, electrical engineer, but I'm just thinking in terms of waves. If the wave starts to just slow and the amplitude doesn't seem to be as high as it once was, the experiences don't really seem to give you these sort of emotional senses and boosts. Switch it up. Try to look for these frequencies of events, see what actually excites you, and try to extract the underlying concepts.
It's like playing it safe, being too comfortable, being too complacent. I'm starting to feel that right now as well. Can totally relate to that.
Yeah, you really want to start to analyze a lot of these underlying concepts and then try to draw them out. I mean, it's paramount to do this. You're going to have a boring 40 years if you don't. And don't get me wrong, security is fantastic. But if you're secure and you don't feel like you're alive, then you need to question the point of what you're actually doing. I think that's what I started to do at Apple and at Intel.
Because you basically saw this was the best it was going to get if I went down the conventional path. Apple and Intel are these juggernauts. These are supposed to be the gold standard. But even then, you weren't satisfied.
Yeah, like we get an aluminum vibrator every year. It's the new aluminum vibrator, and I get the passion that goes into making the aluminum vibrator that sits in your pocket. That is the iPhone, right? Like the iPhone literally is, though. We as a society invest in the juggernaut of Apple to make a great aluminum vibrator, one that gives me my emails and my notifications. But it's an aluminum vibrator at the end of the day. And if you go into your work not really passionate about what you're making, and you spend years there, because we as humans are good at normalizing signals. We can just put up with shit for years and just normalize it, because it's a bed of nails philosophy. You step on one nail, it's going to hurt a lot. You step on a bed of nails and you just keep on adding a nail to those beds, it's not really going to hurt, because you can distribute the pressure across time. Like, time almost acts as a bed of nails. If you feel like you're not getting these pangs of excitement, you really need to start questioning the underlying concepts of why you're not getting these, and then try to create a fundamental shift to go in that direction. And it's the biggest piece of advice I can give to Americans working to look abroad anywhere, even to just make a fundamental change in their lifestyle. Because I know, the underlying concept of your business isn't just, the underlying concept of this podcast isn't just work remotely. It's sort of like add excitement into your lifestyle by working remotely.
Seeking fulfillment, taking ownership of your life and your time, and being the one in the driver's seat. It's really a mindset which carries out into the lifestyle. So no, I think that's awesome. So how can people know more about what you're up to, follow your experiences, and just keep an eye out on what you're up to?
Well, first off, keep up with Nomoko.camera, because we're doing cool stuff. Sponsored content. And then, before I used to say Facebook, but I've actually just stopped using Facebook for the most part. So, friend me on Facebook. Yeah, you'll see an occasional post by me, an awkward little happy birthday message, probably to Jeremy Rubin. He's like the one guy when I'm like, oh, it's his birthday, I should send him a message. He's my one guy out of the 1,500 friends I have, he's like the one guy I send messages to about birthdays, so you'll get that.
Okay, so basically, friend you on Facebook, but don't expect any birthday posts.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you friend me on Facebook, I'm a pretty friendly creature. Google Hangouts has also been the way to go. Just shoot me an email too if you want to ask questions. It's mdaiter 8121@gmail.com. So if you want to shoot me questions about my life, I'll try to answer them. Nothing weird, nothing like what'd you have for dinner last night, and also no factual statements. Like, no, I saw you on the train at 4:30 yesterday, because like that's like overstepping it. But if you just give me your I'm assuming it's the same way for you too. But if you shoot me an email, I'll try to respond.
Thanks for that. Well, with that, I just want to thank you so much for hopping on a call. I think this was everything that I hoped for, and a little bit more. We talked about so much today, and we ended up we just started out doing technical stuff. Like, we had good content on how to actually approach working remotely, setting up your business in Europe. And then we ended up talking about more, mindful, philosophical, emotional things as well. So I think this episode had a little bit of everything, which is great. So thank you again. And we have to bring you on some other time to get another update on where you're at.
Yeah, man, of course. Sounds good.
And that's a wrap for my interview with Matt. If you want to find out more about Matt and his adventures, along with more information about everything we talked about, visit theremotelifestyle.com/8. There you'll find the show notes for this week's episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Remote Podcast. Be sure to leave a review of the show so that I can continue to improve it. If you like what you heard, go ahead and hit subscribe so that you never miss out on an episode. If you're ready to take the leap and live the remote lifestyle, text the word remote to 38470 to sign up for our free email course titled Become a Digital Nomad in 7 Steps, even if you have no idea where to start. The course will take you from sitting in your office wondering what to do with your life to having a plan of action to live and work remotely. So make sure you don't miss out by texting the word remote to 38470 or by going to the URL theremotelifestyle.com/remote. That's all for now, and I'll see you on the next episode.